based around shooting. But the Age of Chivalry mod went medieval with a whole lot more focus on bludgeoning and stabbing. The mod implemented both multiplayer and an original storyline in which knight factions clash, and Half-Life 2's arsenal of guns and crowbars were naturally swapped out for pointier instruments. Eventually, this concept would get a retail release as Chivalry Medieval Warfare. Number 9. Natural Selection 2, mod for Half-Life as Natural Selection. Take the Aliens franchise, add a dash of StarCraft, set it in the Half-Life engine, and you got a pretty good idea of what we're dealing with here. The original NS mod introduced a new game type with a unique asymmetrical approach to multiplayer. Gamers divide up into one of two races, and the human team has a Marine commander. This commander views gameplay as a top-down real-time strategy, rather than a traditional first-person shooter, and supplies the team with tactics, buffs, and upgrades.
Coming. Got your back, Panic. Thanks.
With this interesting team dynamic and a passionate fan community, demand for an updated standalone version was fierce. 2012's Natural Selection 2 did deliver upon most of its promises, and even included a commander mode for the Alien Faction 2, but the community didn't take off quite as well as some had hoped. Number 8. The Stanley Parable, mod for Half-Life 2.
But you need to understand, there's only so much that machine can do.
The Stanley Parable is notorious for making a mundane situation extraordinary, but the mod began doing the opposite.
As Stanley entered the lounge, he was horrified to find not a single person here.
Uninspiring background props from Half-Life 2's science labs became a foundation for Stanley's office space. However, clever scenery changes, a multitude of path choices, and great narration transformed the dull setting into a humorous rabbit hole for players to get lost in.
I'd like to apologize. Not sure where I was going with all that.
Despite fairly simple gameplay, the mod's concept proved a witty critique of traditional game conventions. In its first 2 weeks of release, it saw more than 90,000 downloads, and an equally successful standalone remake launched 2 years later.
Or did you just assume when you saw that timer that something in this room was capable of turning it off?
Since then, it keeps on making number 8 on all the Watch Mojo lists it's eligible for, because someone won't stop pushing that damn 8 button.
8. 8. 8. 8. 8.
Number 7. Red Orchestra, Ostfront 41 to 45. Mod for Unreal Tournament 2004 as Red Orchestra Combined Arms. As the winning entry of an NVIDIA modding competition, Red Orchestra quickly spawned its own standalone title, which gained a number of mods of its own. Set in World War II, the Red Orchestra games aimed to create a more realistic FPS experience. The original instituted bullet drop and pared down the heads-up display, switching the aiming reticle for functional gun sights, which was a novel idea at the time, and eliminated the ammo counter. A splash debut for developer Tripwire Interactive, the game prompted the genre as a whole to reconsider shooter UI and ammo management at large. If you're hoping to get a taste of this sort of realism nowadays, you can check out the latest iteration, Rising Storm, set in the Pacific Theater of World War II. Number 6. Killing Floor, mod for Unreal Tournament 2004. The original Killing Floor mod, released in 2005, had a co-op horde mode, barricade mechanics, and a unique gun upgrade and perk system. Sounds familiar now, but this was 2005. Praised as a guilty pleasure, a standalone version published by Tripwire Interactive came out 4 years later. This timeline unfortunately resulted in dated visuals, but the infectious gameplay snagged Killing Floor a brief top seller spot on Steam and a number of awards. A sequel with better visuals and a more complex enemy system was released on Steam Early Access last year, boasting some of the most impressive gore effects you'll ever see. Number 5. Gary's Mod for Half-Life 2. An introduction course to modding and the Valve fandom, Gary's Mod is a sandbox game with its own special potential.
Incoming!
The mod granted easy access to the source engine's library of objects, allowing players to spawn and populate custom maps of their own. Gamers enthusiastically took advantage of the modification, producing machinima videos, big builds, replicating known game types, and creating all new ones. In fact, Trouble in Terrorist Town and Prop Hunt, two famous user-created game modes, were made available with the final retail version. As of 2015, more than 6 million copies have been distributed, and a sequel is currently in production. Number 4, DayZ, Early Access, mod of Arma 2. As a game, DayZ puts the survival back in survival horror. As a mod, it drops a zombie apocalypse into a military sim. While the Arma games themselves still struggle to find mass appeal, DayZ took off like wildfire throughout the gaming community. Not so much for its awesome zombies, but more so for the fact that the freedom that the game allowed helped create an innumerable amount of tense and potentially hilarious situations as players interacted with each other.
Oh, just one dead here.
They're coming down. Look out.
With such wide audience appeal, the mod inspired many similar games and catapulted Arma 2 to the top of Steam charts 3 years after the game's initial release. Although it seems to be stuck in early access hell, the standalone version is still trucking along, as are the Arma 3 versions, if you're into that. Number 3, Team Fortress Classic and Team Fortress 2, mod of Quake as Team Fortress. Many mods change a game's objectives, but the Team Fortress mod changed the player. As one of the earliest examples of classes in a multiplayer shooter, Team Fortress transformed Quake from mindless mayhem to team-based extravaganza overnight. Years later, Valve would hire the team behind Team Fortress to build a standalone version on their Half-Life engine Gold Source. Though this standalone version, dubbed Team Fortress Classic, was successful in its own right. It wasn't until the cartoony sequel that the series would see runaway success, now free to play on Steam. Bring your hats. Number 2, Dota 2, mod for Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos as Defense of the Ancients. Defense of the Ancients is one of the earliest and most enduring examples of the MOBA genre. The original mod was developed using Warcraft 3's world editor, but its innovative game type was based on a modded map for StarCraft called Aeon of Strife. For more than a decade, Dota has been developed by mostly anonymous map makers and modders with new heroes, maps, and modes introduced by the fandom.
I pledge my loyalty.
And now, with even more successful Dota 2 developed by Valve, the game has in turn become one of the biggest esports today, with the largest prize pool ever for an esport, set at a whopping 18 million.
Would you be wise? Then come closer and I will unlock your inner cunning.
And as for the MOBA genre that Dota essentially created, it's here to stay too. Before we unveil our top pick, here are a few honorable mentions. Number 1, Counter-Strike, standalone, mod for Half-Life. One of the most famous FPS titles of all time, Counter-Strike was the perfect storm of real-world weapons and crushingly competitive permadeath, arriving smack dab in the middle of a genre that was currently overflowing with rocket jumps and railguns. At one point the most popular multiplayer game in the world, Counter-Strike soon outgrew its humble beginnings as a mod for Half-Life. Half-Life 2 then shipped with the updated Counter-Strike Source, which was in turn followed by Global Offensive in 2012. Much like Dota and Dota 2, its popularity has only increased as the esports genre has taken off. CSGO is currently sitting as the most profitable FPS in the international competitive scene. Not too shabby for something that essentially began in a basement. Do you agree with our list?
No, that's not possible. I can't believe it.
What mods do you think deserve a full game release?
Well done. It's well within acceptable bounds.
For more blockbuster top 10s published every day, be sure to subscribe to WatchMojo.com.
Yes!